Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, only on Revolution Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Jim White and Jason Van Tatenhove.
The crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Please hang up and try again.
Hello, this is Joel.
Joel, this is Jason and Jim with the Liberty Brothers, and you are live on the air with us on the Liberty Brothers Radio Show.
Well, it's good to be with you guys, especially since you've got a notorious sheriff in Spokane now.
Yeah, we were
Indeed.
just speaking about that just in hour one. So let me give you a quick introduction, and we can maybe move into that topic right off the bat. Joel Skousen is a political scientist by training, specializing in the philosophy of law and constitutional theory. He's also a designer of high-security residences and retreats. He has designed self-sufficient and high-security homes throughout North America and has consulted in Central America as well. His latest book in the field is Strategic Relocation, a North American Guide to Safe Places, and is active in consulting with persons who need to relocate for security and increase self-sufficiency. He also helps people who need to live near a large city to develop contingency retreat plans involving rural farm and recreational property. Welcome to the show, Joel, and let's talk about the constitutionality, because what we were talking about was, that sheriff who's there making those comments, and of course we're talking about that situation in Spokane, where there was a video done at a public event where a question was asked, why would you need an MRAP armored vehicle like this? And his response was basically, I'm paraphrasing, that due to the constitutionalists who, are all very heavily armed and whatnot, but that apparently, being a constitutionalist now is very akin to being a terrorist and being a potential violent offender. And the police chief there didn't seem to think there was anything wrong with that statement. And now, of course, we have Representative Matt Shea coming out against it, and seems to be quite a uproar beginning, which rightfully so. I mean, this officer himself swore an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution from, enemies foreign and domestic. Do you think it is just that these officers don't realize what an oath is and don't understand what the Constitution is? Or have they just been so brainwashed in their training that they're disregarding it all?
Well, of course, they view themselves as mainstream interpreters of the Constitution, and those of us who are strict interpretation, or believe in a strict interpretation of the Constitution, as extremists or radicals. So they don't really see any conflict. They haven't read the Constitution. They just take the oath as a matter of course. But they have been propagandized by the Southern Poverty Law Conference, who has blackballed all conservatives and labeled them all extremists. And there are a few, who are extreme enough and have made statements that, they can make this case. But obviously anybody who, in the Spokane area, in the northern Idaho area, who really understood how many constitutionalists there are in the area, would not be taking that position unless they had actually harbored resentment against those that really hold to a true interpretation of the Constitution.
Joel, since we had you on last, switching gears a little bit, this is Jim. Thanks for joining us today, Joel. Really appreciate you coming on. Since we've had you on last, I think oil has probably dropped in half, and there's panic going on right now in Russia. The ruble is it may have collapsed or be very close to it as we're speaking now, or at least they were claiming it might. What in the world's going on with this oil, Joel? I know, we had talked about some trends that were happening and perhaps, some future events. I don't know if those, if you had oil dropping in half, on your board when we were talking about that. What do you think about all this, Joel? And when's it going to end? And what's going to be the geopolitical ramifications of all this cheap oil?
Well, cheap oil is really the way it should be. This is not something that's bad. The trouble is that oil-producing countries, from Russia to Saudi Arabia to Venezuela and others, have basically pre-spent that money with budgets that are way over the top. Saudi Arabia needs $100 a barrel oil just to survive their budgetary. Venezuela needs about $150 a barrel to survive. Russia also needs about $100 a barrel to keep their budgets balanced. About 80% of the budget in Russia is due to oil. At least it used to be. Now it has dropped about 50%. Now, this doesn't. Let me just go through the background of this. A lot of what I consider, questionable conspiracy theories talk about the West taking down Russia. I hear it all over the internet now, getting Saudi Arabia to increase their production. In fact, that has not happened. Saudi Arabia has simply, along with other OPEC countries, refused to cut production to support a higher oil price. And the basic cut production, they're already in the hole, and if they cut production at lower prices, it might raise it up $10 a barrel, but that's not going to help them significantly. They need every dollar that they can get, and so they have to keep producing. The U.S. oil producers, which have basically caused the glut, meaning that instead of being a deficit producer now, we are an exporter of oil now, and getting close to being the top oil producing country in the world now, right up there with Saudi Arabia and Russia. But you see, the U.S. can't cut production to support higher oil prices because all of these shale oil wells in the U.S. and Canada and the fracking that has gone in to produce those, there's been a tremendous amount of investment in that, and they have to get back the money out of the investment, so they have no incentive to stop producing oil. In fact, a lot of people say, well, they're going to be losing money if they go below $70 a barrel. Well, that isn't true. It is true in terms of new oil production. No new oil are going to be developed at this low price, but the people have already invested the money in these current oil fracking operations are going to have to keep going in order to pay for that investment. So I don't see that ever stopping anytime soon. But here's the reason the oil really the price is dropping dramatically. Production was increasing steadily over demand as demand was dropping because of the winter months. Generally, oil demand cuts down by at least a third. And so for a while it was maintaining its price because they were basically storing all the oil. Every single tanker that was idle is filled with oil. Every tank on ground is filled with oil. And as soon as those tanks and tankers filled up, there was no more storage, no place to go except down in the oil price. They had to start to dump the oil on the market. Refineries, have all those stockpiles full, and they're basically refining everything they can. And so that's why the oil price is going down. The one reason why gas has not gone down half, as it should, is because they have future pricing where they bought, a lot of this oil is sold in future contracts, and those future contracts were bought at the higher oil prices. So that has to work its way out of the system. They have to sell that higher priced oil before they can buy, and they're buying, lower priced now. The benefit is that everybody who needs oil, like Japan and China, is stocking up at these lower prices. They're trying to buy everything that they can. Same with gold and silver, which have been driven down through manipulation to low prices. China and other countries are buying up as much as they can. Now, everyone's expecting Russia, of course, to have a second fall of the Soviet Union, so to speak. Well, the first one was a phony fall. They claimed that it was low oil prices that drove the original Soviet Union to bankruptcy, but that really wasn't true. Oil fluctuates, a lot of times. And besides, the Soviets have basically printed their way, or, they have a command economy, and so they can continue to produce weapons even if the currency becomes relatively worthless. Remember that in the Soviet days, the currency was worthless anyway. Nobody wanted any rubles. The only reason that the currency and the ruble came up to international levels is because the West and the globalists were pushing investment into Russia. They were pretending for many, many years that Russia was reformed and that it was going to be free market and it was, wasn't as hostile as before. And so a lot of companies in Europe got snookered into making investments. And what happened then, as soon as as Russia really started going after Ukraine and the sanctions started to take hold and the oil price dropped, all of a sudden there was no value in the ruble. Except for military weapons, Russia is not an exporting country. And so nobody needs the ruble to trade. And so all of a sudden, the banks stopped dealing with Russia. All the investments pulled out of Russia. And so all that Russia can do is, they were printing significant amounts of rubles before, but now it's been exposed for what it is. And so prices are rising as people are panicking in Russia. You've got an inflation mentality going forward where they basically say, hey, the ruble's lost 50% of the value since July, 50% in 6 months. And it's just lost another, 20% just in the past few days. So this is really bad. But it isn't that it's collapsing. It never should have been as high as it has been. It always should have been this low. It was propped up artificially. So this is not going to cause Russia to attack the West. They aren't ready to do that. They're basically going to go back to their old Soviet command economy. They'll continue to build lots of weapons of mass destruction. But I don't think the timetable for war has risen significantly.
Really? That was going to be my next question, because we are seeing increased activity happening along the border there in the Ukraine, and obviously a lot of people are saying that, what we're seeing happen in Russia is due to kind of a new Cold War. But I'm glad you laid it out like you did. That was definitely one of the questions I was going to ask is, could you explain that situation so that we can understand it? Because it seems like there is a lot of conflicting reports happening in Russia, but you've always maintained that it'll be many years down the road that we actually finally see a conflict happening there, and that Russia just is not ready to go up against us at this point.
Well, we pushed Japan into World War II by cutting off oil supplies and forcing her to take aggressive action against the United States. Japan doesn't have any indigenous oil and therefore has to import everything. And so when you cut off oil supply, the U.S. bent the arm of Britain to shut down all the oil coming out of Indonesia and their other operations down there. You really forced Japan to war. And to a certain extent, that's what the U.S. and the globalists in the U.S. have done in invading Libya, where China had 30,000 oil workers, basically squeezing China. And that's what's eventually one of the reasons for taking out Iran, is to squeeze China. China's the biggest purchaser of Iranian oil and also Iraqi oil. And so the U.S. can squeeze that off at any time, too. But the difference between Japan and China and Russia, or Japan in World War II and China and Russia in terms of World War III, is, they've really got a lot of high-tech weapon systems that are just starting to emerge from testing. They won't be into full production until 2020 through 2025. So if Russia decided to, take on the West early, it would be a fairly short war, because they just don't have a lot of their anti-satellite weapons ready yet. They're working on hypersonic weapons, which are maneuvering space-based warheads that come in and can maneuver and come in with under power instead of just being ballistic. They have, scramjet engines and things, and they can power their way down at 10,000 miles an hour, making it very difficult for APM systems to hit them. So I just think, I will be the first to say that I have to watch this every week in my World Affairs brief. But if I see some real signs of war, I personally think, and I've said this in my World Affairs brief many times, I think that until North Korea attacks South Korea, and I think that's the trigger event for World War III, everything else is bluster. It's true that that Russia is eventually going to try to take back the former Soviet states, but they're only into Ukraine right now. They haven't taken back, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Poland, and the Baltics. The Baltics are probably the next one after Romania. And, NATO is pretty concerned about the Baltics. The Baltics themselves are. They have many millions of Russians that they put into the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, in order to create conflict to give Russia an excuse to go in, just like they did in Ukraine. But I want to make sure that your listeners who haven't heard my point of view understand very clearly that a lot of the anti-globalists, and I'm an anti-globalist, a lot of the uninformed anti-globalists keep putting out the propaganda that the U.S. created the coup in Ukraine. And so they are basically trying to provoke Russia. They're trying to do everything, and they're trying to starve Russia of money and to provoke a war. But it really isn't that simple. In fact, the coup in Ukraine was created by Russia. And the proof of that, I've said it time and again, and nobody's had any counter to this, the proof that Russia pulled off the coup, making it appear as if pro-Russia, but Russia did it, is that they were the ones who had control of the Berkut, the secret police, and the powerful state police that were, protecting all the buildings from the protesters in Ukraine. And they're the only ones who could have given the orders for them to go back into the barracks and let the coup win. In other words, they receded. It's just like, constitutionalists protesting for months in Washington, D.C., demanding the ouster of Barack Obama. And all of a sudden, the Marines leave the White House, and all this the police in Washington, D.C. simply disappear. And all these protesters, constitutionalists in Washington, take over the White House. Now, how realistic is that? That the Marines are just going to walk away, go back to the barracks, and let all the protesters walk through? Well, that's what happened in Ukraine. And not a single media piece ever covered the fact of how strange this is. Why did the Berkut go back to their barracks? Well, only the Russian side could have dictated that. And that's why I've said, just like the fall of the Soviet Union was a carefully crafted deception, fall of Ukraine to the pro-Russian Poroshenko was a carefully crafted deception. And he's playing the role of both aggravating Eastern Ukraine and playing up. I mean, all his best friends are oligarchs in Russia. How believable is this that he's anti-Russian? It's not really believable. So what I'm saying is a very confusing scenario, but still, I think militarily speaking, both Russia and China are getting more aggressive, but they're ways off from being strong enough to attack the West. I think we still have time.
Well, Joel, switching gears a little bit, I wanted to get your take on what's happening with Sony. We've kind of been seeing some unprecedented actions happening with a major corporation and with the hacking that's happened. And as we're on the air now, they've actually decided to pull the theatrical release of the interview for the Christmas weekend because of the threat of terrorist attack on movie theaters and whatnot. But of course, the story behind it being that this hacking group, which is supposedly supposed to be coming out of North Korea, hacked into Sony, and they're the GOP, and not the Grand Old Party, but the Guardians of the Peace. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's happening there with Sony, and it seems to be this interaction with North Korea, and is this going to change how these big corporations do business? Are we going to see kind of a change happening because of this?
Well, I don't think there's going to be a major change. These corporations are globalist in orientation. And they did take a position, Sony took a position that was hostile to North Korea, blackened its name, and North Korea looks like it's getting back. But this is definitely a personal vendetta against Sony for daring to come out and call a spade a spade. And, and it's not over because, they have these Trojans basically infiltrating those computers, and they still have some of them that are pumping out emails. So this is not something that Sony's been able to shut down yet. And so Sony's really on the block. Basically, it's made it a pariah in the industry just because nobody trusts talking to Sony. The employees, for example, are using the telephone. They're not using email. It's been totally shut down in Sony until they get a handle on this. But it just shows you that North Korea is one of the most evil regimes in the world. It's one of the most dangerous regimes in the world. And something has to explain why the U.S. treats North Korea with kid gloves and is constantly threatening to take down Iran. Now, they presently have a hiatus against that attack Iran syndrome. But that's because the Israelis who are going to begin that attack had demanded that Syria be taken down first, and Syria got waylaid in terms of the target for the globalists by John Kerry making that big mistake at the London press conference when the reporter asked him, is there any way that Syria can avoid this imminent attack from the United States? It's no-fly zone, imminent attack, and Kerry said, well, yeah, if they gave up their their chemical weapons. And immediately Syria and Russia say, we accept. And that just derailed the timetable for taking down Syria and Iran in the Middle East. And you can bet that John Kerry got a thrashing of his life when he got off the stage that day for having ruined the globalist plans in the Middle East. But I still don't think that the Middle East is going to, amount to a World War III scenario, even though it's probably going to go into war before this third World War that I'm predicting, triggered by North Korea. And the reason North Korea is such an excellent trigger is that it's such overwhelming force from the north versus the south. I mean, 200 million men versus 50,000 troops, 20,000 artillery tubes versus 3,000. I mean, you can literally lay Seoul bare with artillery in about 2 days if they launch a constant barrage, not to mention 2,000 or 2 million men sweeping across the border. What I'm saying is that it's very likely that the U.S. would have to use tactical nukes in order to stop that kind of invasion, and that would give China the excuse they're looking for to say, you started it, first use of nuclear weapons, give them an excuse to attack U.S. military targets. And I don't believe in this war scenario that Russia and China intend to attack American cities per se, strictly military targets at first. And the reason is they don't want to destroy these economies to which they depend upon. They want to simply destroy the military and then blackmail the civilian populations into submission. Now, our globalist leaders know that, I think. They intend to come out of their bunkers and whip up a pro-war hysteria. And I think the secret of all of this engineering of a future war with Russia and China has to do with we need a 9/11, much bigger 9/11, to drive people into the arms of a militarized global government. And a nuclear strike on U.S. military targets would wipe out the U.S. military, basically, and the whole world would be in a panic. How do we save ourselves against these attackers, Russia and China, without the U.S. military? Our leaders come out of their bunkers and say, well, we can, form a global military to fight this war. And in the meantime, I think they will bring out high-tech secret weapon systems that they have been developing that they did not use or will not use to defend America, but they will bring them out after the first strike, after they've given everyone an excuse to join a global military, and then keep any other nuclear weapons from falling in to buy them time. Now, that's the scenario, I think, about how it's going to work out. There has to be a reason why the globalists, they have to have a game plan. I know that they're setting us up to absorb a nuclear first strike. They said as much in PDD 60, Presidential Decision Directive 60. Don't depend on, launch on warning, but prepared, they tell the military, to absorb a nuclear first strike and then retaliate afterwards. That's, of course, suicide. But it isn't suicide if the globalists have a game plan of bringing out secret weapon systems after the first strike to then keep the weapons at bay. But I think there's a long-term agenda there. I don't think there's going to be economic collapse before then. Why would they pull the plug on the economy when they can keep it going by continual bailouts? And then when war comes, they get cover. It covers for a collapse. It covers for a new world currency. It's not their fault. They're still your leaders. They're still your heroes because it was the war that caused it, not us. And I think that's the way it's going to play out.
Joel, you speak about high-tech weapons, and I saw a report on SHTFplan.com by Max Slavo, does great work over there. And I want to say you were even referenced in this article. But what this was some laser that, instantly took out anything coming across within its range and almost blew it up instantaneously. These laser weapons, I think this is sort of a new thing. I don't think I'd ever seen anything like that before. He referenced because he's Max familiar with my theory about the U.S. absorbing a nuclear first strike and then bringing out secret weapon systems, and he felt, here's one of those secret weapon systems, but it isn't.
The problem with he quoted a Yahoo story which says that it instantaneously takes them out, and that is not true. The tests are out there. You have to train it on it, and it takes 15 or 20 seconds to suddenly get the target to ignite. And that was a target that had some explosives sitting on a boat that was being towed by another boat, and it was training it on it until it heated it up enough that it exploded the thing. But it took many seconds to do that. So it is not instantaneous. It can't just simply zap an aircraft in an instant, nor a nuclear warhead. So it's not that advanced yet.
Well, in that same vein, I know you probably have some advanced knowledge on some of these things. You talk about secret weapons. I mean, do you have any? I know there, of course, if you knew a lot about them, it wouldn't be quote unquote secret. But are these type of laser technology weapons? Are these the type of things that, generally speaking, that we're moving towards? Of course, drones been out for a long time. But is this laser technology? Is that the next level?
Well, it is the next level, but as I say, it just takes a tremendous generating system. And you look at what happened to the coal, out there, and all the electrical power went out. The Donald Cook. Well, at least that's the rumor. But what I'm saying is that it takes a tremendous generation of electricity to run these lasers, and they can barely fit that into a 747 if they have a ton of generators running off the engines on that thing, and that's what they've been trying. But there's nothing to indicate, at least in the atmosphere, that they're that lethal. Outside of the atmosphere, they're a lot more lethal because you don't have the atmosphere degrading the lasers. So this is my supposition. I don't have insider knowledge, but I do have contacts in the military who, like myself, suspect and have seen little references here and there. There are two things that most people suspect are the nature of the secret. One's space-based lasers, which are much more powerful in terms of anti-satellite weapons than ground-based lasers, and space-based anti-ballistic missiles with warheads. Small interceptor missiles already deployed. In other words, Star Wars did get built, even though with black budget money, even though they claimed that it was disbanded. The problem with the U.S. ABM system is it has no warhead. It has to hit and make direct contact with the tungsten warhead, an incoming warhead. Current warheads come in at 5,000 to 7,000 miles per hour. Very difficult to hit, but they are a trajectory. They can be calculated, but still to hit a pinpoint. The warhead's only about 20 inches across. That's very, very, very difficult to hit with very sophisticated radar tracking. If they use any kind of deployment measures or to evade that, it's going to be a miss. Well, the Russians all have explosive warheads on their anti-missiles, and I think we've only done this kinetic warhead, non-explosive warhead, just because we don't want the missiles to be effective at taking down a Russian first strike. But that doesn't mean the U.S. probably doesn't have explosive warheads, and if they're space-based, they can really target those weapons before they release, in their boost phase, before they release their missiles, and can be very, very effective. So that's what I suspect: space-based lasers and space-based anti-missile systems. What does that do? You can't attack another country with that, but it does buy you time. It stops them from any further attacks, so that the U.S. can build up this global military and get it operational.
Let's change gears again a little bit here. Beef prices have just climbed to another record. They're topping out about $4.20 a pound, and we're seeing food prices across the board seem to be skyrocketing more and more. Obviously, the droughts in California and the weather across the western part of the country is probably not going to help things out. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on food prices and what's going to be happening in the economy over the next year that we're coming up on. What are your thoughts there?
I don't think that we're going to have any major famine. California is probably going to get sufficient rain this year in order to overcome this drought situation. So I think food prices will stabilize. I don't think they will come down. I think this is partly the inflationary scenario that we've long predicted, that the government really has only one weapon left, and that's inflation. And they, have been inflating about 6 to 9%. And so all of the food prices rising. You take eggs, milk, all of that stuff has nearly doubled in the past 2 or 3 years. So, but that's really a function of inflation as well as bad policy, like taking a lot of the grains and making alcohol out of them and subsidizing that with, and causing major price rises. There's also regulation, restriction of cheap imports of beef from Argentina. All of those things has caused these prices to rise. But I don't see any major famine, something that would be, catastrophic on the horizon. As I say, I think the globalists really want to just keep things muddling along until this major war comes. And they can't control it, by the way. They have to wait for Russia and China to strike. They can't go out and provoke it, or it looks like their fault. So they have to wait and provoke, and that's one of the reasons why they keep disarming. We've just taken off the triple warheads we have on all of our 450 Minuteman III missiles and turned them into Minuteman Is. So we've just reduced our nuclear throw weight to now 400 warheads instead of 1,200. And Russia, in the meantime, and China are building massive amounts of new weapons of mass destruction.
Now, are we doing? So, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Are we doing that to kind of put more of a carrot out there? Look, we don't have nearly as many weapons as we used to.
Precisely. They know that Russia and China are building and trying to catch up. It's very costly to catch up. They can never quite catch up. They have to do it by stealing technology or buying it from Israel. Our globalists do allow Israel to sell high technology to China so that we don't get caught doing it, but Israel does it on our behalf. It's a real thing that the media has never really covered very well. But yes, it's a carrot. The problem is that Russia and China just keep delaying and delaying this attack. The globalists need this attack to finally, look what's happening politically around the world. The EU, the major anti-EU parties have the majority now. Now, it's not they have a plurality. They have the largest block of votes in the EU Parliament, the anti-EU factions. Now, they haven't been able to cobble to get an absolute majority. The pro-EU parties, even though they bicker ceaselessly between themselves, they still have the majority of votes, but the anti-EU sentiment in Europe is growing by leaps and bounds, and so is the UK Independent Party, which is anti-EU. They now are the largest party there after this previous election. They still don't have a majority, but the powers that be are worried, and that's why they will give the world a war to stop this reluctance to join a new world order. A war will force people to do it because the United States military will be decapitated. There's no one to protect us except this new global government. At least that's what our leaders will tell us. So I think all of these things, whether it's food, drought, anything that they can control, they're going to keep going until war comes. War is the mother of all terrorism. It justifies anything they want to tell us, and no one will say boo to them in protest except us, and we won't be big enough.
Joe, we've been talking recently about external threats to this country. However, you see the marches against police brutality going on across the country, and I don't know exactly the locations. I think New York's one of them. But if this whole police beating down the citizen thing, and we've talked here before, we're not against police. I think the majority of the police are good. I think it's a minority of these police officers that treat their fellow citizens this way. But do you think, Joel, that we could, before we get this external war, that we could face an internal revolution type thing, or at least in some parts of the country, because it seems like these police militarization scenarios are becoming more common, and now I think there's like school systems that are getting these type of vehicles. It's kind of crazy. They're just giving them out to anybody that really wants them. How do you see this whole people against the police scenario playing out, Joel? And do you think that's going to come to a head before we have the external threats from Russia and China?
Well, it's a complex subject. What is clear, however, is that the powers that be don't have any intention of reining in these rogue police people, these macho, thuggish police abusers. I mean, even today, you almost have a daily story about some policeman who just does something off the wall. And, I mean, just like this policeman in, I forgot where it was, where he was putting on Twitter, he was threatening protesters and challenging them, telling them, boy, I'm going to meet you at the movie theater, and I'm going to come armed, and bring it on, type of thing. And so he gets paid administrative leave. The police chief says, well, we're going to investigate this. They investigated it, just say, well, we slapped his hands, he's back on duty. I mean, there are no consequences for this abuse. The only time there are any consequences at all is when somebody videotapes police abuse, because the police will lie, they will plant a weapon, they will plant drugs on people in order to justify their abuse, unless you have a video or audio recording of it, you can't get to first base. And even then, the courts will not send the policeman to jail. They will let taxpayers pay the reparations, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars to the victims. The policeman goes back to work or gets suspended for a short time, or very rare occasions gets dismissed. In the case of, Officer Wilson, he basically had to quit because his life wasn't safe anymore. He just could not patrol the city anymore. And I say good riddance. But, there was no consequences for this policeman in New York who killed Garner in a chokehold, and it's absolutely unjustifiable to have, caused his death. It wasn't violent. It's not going to end. I think the important point that the globalists realize is that, this is the type of policeman we want to take down dissidents. We want the kind of deputy sheriff in Spokane County that knows that constitutionalists are the target and fully intends to take them down. And these people have military background. They're just itching to use these MRAP vehicles and their SWAT equipment and automatic weapons, which the government's giving them, and use them on American dissidents. And I think that's what these urban warfare training things, like what's going on now in Texas, black helicopters, special forces doing urban training in cities. They're doing it in American cities not because they're simulating combat in Somalia. They're simulating future combat against American dissidents. And they're not telling these police that. They're telling them this. I mean, they're not telling them any reason, although they do give scenarios, fake scenarios about, some constitutionalist or somebody who's a domestic terrorist here with high-powered weapons. But they're clearly planning on taking down Americans. We won't need foreign troops coming in to do it. Got plenty of thugs in the United States to take Americans down.
Well, Joel, but historically speaking, we're armed to the teeth as a nation. I mean, this similar Gestapo game is not going to play. It'll play out for a while until people start banding together. But unlike some of these other countries that have been taken over by the police force, we're heavily armed around here. Do you think that's going to be the equalizer?
Well, it's hard to be an equalizer. It just depends to what degree. It will certainly, in the Solzhenitsyn scenario of the no longer will you have the two people come up to arrest somebody. He said if somebody had a gun, you could take out one or two of these, KGB agents that came to arrest you. But in America, it will always be SWAT team size. There'll be overwhelming force, and that's why they're practicing overwhelming force. Now, it takes a while for it to become justifiable, where people will really take up arms against the forces when they take down people one at a time, like in the Ruby Ridge with overwhelming force. Having personal weapons isn't an equalizer. It has to arise to something that's big enough and bad enough that gets people, justified in taking arms against your own police forces. And we're not there yet, and that's why the protests are very appropriate. The courts, I don't think, will listen. They're going to give us lip service. Look at Cleveland. The Department of Justice cataloged, a dozen years of police abuse. And what have they done? Nobody went to jail. They didn't reinstate any court cases against the police officers. They just said, we're going to monitor you for a while. No consequences. We're going to monitor. Everyone will be careful for a while, and then the monitoring will go away. But as long as there's no consequences keeps going, we're going to have more and more thuggishness. in police as they get away with these things. Now, that said, I don't think that they're going to do anything big and bad enough against American people or gun owners until war comes. I think you're going to see the martial law wait until war comes, because were they to try to do that now, it just wouldn't seem justifiable to people. Especially look at the latest polls, the Pew poll and the several other polls. It's overwhelming, even after Sandy Hook, and they had a skewed question. Is this gun stuff getting out of hands? With things like Sandy Hook, don't you agree that we should have more gun control? And other people said, no, it won't help at all. Up to 96% in certain areas saying no more gun control. So the pendulum is swinging away from them. They're not going to get gun control, and that's only guarantees that war will be the instigator. These globalists know how to use conflict creation. I'm telling you, war is the thing that's going to bring all hell from governments loose on us. And there will be an EMP strike before the nuclear strike, so that we will have social unrest because of no electricity in the United States. And government will lose power for maybe 6 months while they knit things back together. But boy, when they knit it back together, it's going to be under a very strong iron fist. In the name of safety and in the name of rounding up people with weapons, I think you're going to finally see gun confiscation happen, but not till war comes.
Well, Joel, we are in our Christmas special, and we forgot to ask you at the beginning of the show, so I'm going to ask you now. We've been asking all of our guests to share one of their, whatever you might celebrate over the holidays. If you have a favorite tradition or a memory that jumps out at you. We wanted to kind of start the show off on a holiday theme, and of course we jumped right into the questioning, so I thought we'd come back to it now. Is there maybe a holiday past that is extra special to you, or a certain tradition you and your family do? Can you tell us a little bit?
Yes, there is. We do have a real personal family. We have a cabin in the mountains with a great big Yule fireplace, big natural tree, and we have a big piano up there. And so we all sit around and we sing Christmas carols at the piano. But then after that's done, we've had a long tradition in our family. Just by way of introduction, my uncle was W. Cleon Skousen, the great American patriot who wrote many books on liberty and the Constitution. A lot of people don't realize that he also wrote a lot of books about the Bible, about the Old Testament, and he wrote a special book called The Real Story of Christmas. He died in 2006, but it must be 20 or 30 years even before he died. He took this book, The Real Story of Christmas, is powerfully written. It's just a beautiful historical rendition. And then he hired a professional narrator and a symphonic orchestra to put to score the entire story of the birth of the Savior, with his narration and the professional narrator voicing it. And it's just a beautiful, powerful, just brings tears to your eyes. It's so well done. So we sit around and listen to the tape recording of The Real Story of Christmas by W. Cleon Skousen. And it still is available. I think you can find it somewhere on the internet, but it's a grand tradition in our family, and it never ceases to inspire and bring the real story of Christmas relative to Jesus Christ to our family each year.
Well, that's great. That's a great story, Joel. We've got 6 or 7 minutes left, and we want to give you some time, of course, to direct people towards all your great work. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but what I'm hearing is, as I made a comment, maybe outside of maybe Stalin and Mao, I can't think of two worse candidates. It looks like it might be a Hillary and Jeb Bush 2016. Do you think that's gonna transpire, or what does your crystal ball tell you? Do you think they're gonna have what it takes, or we're looking at maybe somebody different?
Well, I think Hillary will be the nominee for the Democrats. Really no question about it. It's her turn as far as the globalists are concerned. But I don't really think the globalists want Hillary to win. And the reason is there's a tremendous backlash in this country against Obama, against the Democrats. We saw that in the midterm election. It's going to be stronger in 2016. So the way the globalists think is the way to defuse that is not to give them Witch Hillary, because she is the witch of the East, and she'll cause so much hatred against government. I think they're going to give us a controlled republic. I think that's what they'll typically do. The big problem is they've got to stop Rand Paul. He's clearly the most charismatic, strongest speaking, and I have problems with Rand because he is a compromiser with the Republican establishment. He thinks he can influence them by compromise, and it's only a one-way compromise. They never, Mitch McConnell never compromises back towards him. But he's the one to beat in terms of the establishment. They're going to try to foist Chris Christie on us. That won't work. So they've got about 4 or 5 other controlled Republicans they'll keep throwing at the public to see which one takes. Jeb Bush is one of them. He's already now thrown his hat in the ring. But they've got 4 or 5 others. I'm not sure Jeb Bush is going to make it just because of the history of the Bushes as globalists. It's going to be hard for the Tea Party to swallow that. But much more would rather see Ted Cruz or Rand Paul rather than Jeb Bush. Marco Rubio is a possibility as well. But as I say, I think we're going to get a Republican president in 2016. He'll be controlled, and if we do get into a war in Russia in the next 8 years after that election, what better way than to have a Republican talking us all into this benign global government that will save us from this war? I mean, Hillary Clinton is not going to be able to have any confidence in the public as a war president. A Republican would. So I predict a Republican in 2016.
Well, Joel, we're coming up on the end here. I've got one more question for you, and then we want you to give out your websites and where they can get more information on your newsletter and everything else. And again, thank you so much for coming back on the show. We always love having you on. We're coming up on the new year, and obviously forecasting trends is one of the things you do. What are some of the biggest blips on your radar for the upcoming year?
Well, the upcoming year will be the betrayal of conservatives by Republicans. We've already got a glimpse of that in John Boehner and this spending bill, which just basically didn't do anything they wanted. Didn't get rid of Obamacare. It funded amnesty. By the time that February rolls around and they cut funding for the HS or DHS, it's a done deal. All the 5 million, at least 5 million, there could be as many 20 million that get amnesty under Obama's new policy memo. But I think this is going to be the complete, how should I say, disassociation of the true conservative will finally never again trust the Republicans after what will happen this next year. So I think that's the main story. Russia and China will continue to arm. We will see more, probably some economic unrest. We could see, the stock market is overblown. We could see a stock market drop 10 or 20%. It will not be, in my opinion, the economic collapse that everyone's been hyping for the last 4 years, and they've been wrong. They just don't understand the powers that be and their desires to keep things going until war comes as the major implement. So I don't see war. The Middle East could blow up and the stock market could go down 20%, but it won't be a catastrophe. I think we're still going to see basic inflation continuing, bringing a little bit of inflationary respite, but no long-term solutions will come from the Republican Congress.
Joe, real quick, what's your thoughts on gold and silver, and then give out your websites or email address or anything else you'd like to give out to our listeners?
I'm afraid that gold and silver is going to continue to be manipulated downward. I think the powerful forces are restocking themselves with gold. That's why they've driven the price down. I don't think they're going to allow it to come up anytime soon. So I'm not sure it's going to be something that's going to bring us returns on our investment over the years. But it's going to be better than inflation. At least it won't go down too much further, in my opinion. My website is worldaffairsbrief.com, and people can get a free sample issue by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. And from there, you can get to my other website, joelskousen.com, where I have all of the books that have been mentioned about how to prepare for these problems that are coming. Strategic relocation and securing your home are my major works that you should consider.
Well, Joe, I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming back on the air with us here. We really enjoyed having you here in Kalispell and doing that video with you, and you were gracious enough to come on as a guest back then, and we really really great that you signed on with us here on our Christmas special week here, our holiday special. We just thank you so much, Joel, and we hope you keep up your great work. And perhaps after the first of the year, as things continue to move along, we might be able to have you back here again to give us sort of fill us in on your thoughts on things.
I'd be happy to anytime. Thank you very much, and have a Merry Christmas, you guys.
Happy holidays.
Thanks to you, Joel. Take care.
All right, well, that was Joel Skousen, author and trend forecaster, really, with the whole newsletter thing he does, the Trends Journal. I'm gonna have to.
That's Salente. Salente is a Trends Journal. He's the World Affairs Brief.
World Affairs Brief. Sorry, but I'm gonna have to email get that edition. I haven't actually read it yet. Have you?
I think I have got a free one. Yeah, I think sometime back I did get a free one. And a lot of these guys, I don't know Joe. I didn't have a chance to ask him, but a lot of these guys that have these newsletters. I mean, if you really have if you really don't have the finances, or you're like a student, or you're working part time, and you email them, a lot of times these guys will just give it to you for free, because all it really is just to add. I'm not saying you should do that if you really don't need it, but I mean, it's just a matter of throwing your email address on their email list. I mean, it's not like it doesn't cost them anything.
I don't know, but I'm gonna have to get a copy sent out. All right, folks. Well, that was our Wednesday edition holiday special. We will be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel.